I heard the splash first, the unmistakable plop of something heavy hitting water, and when I rushed out to my dock, fishing pole in hand, I came face to face with a brand new wrought iron gate. It gleamed under the morning sun like a smug tribute to bureaucracy, gone rogue. Behind it, bolted with obnoxious pride, was a shiny plaque that read, Private HOA, access-only violators will be prosecuted. My dock, my lake, my property cut off like I was some trespasser in my own yard. And just to add insult to injury, a security camera was pointed directly at me, blinking a red light like a smug little taunt. That was when I realized something absurd and deliberate was happening. And her name, as I would soon learn, was Karen Roush. Living by the lake had always been my retirement dream. After 27 years designing highways and drainage systems, I cashed out and bought myself a cozy A-frame cabin on the edge of Hemlock Lake, a quiet pine-lined haven. My backyard rolled gently into a stretch of cattails that opened into the glistening water. Each morning I'd stroll out to my creaky wooden dock thermos in hand and cast a line into the mist. The land was fully paid off. No mortgage, no liens, and most importantly, no HOA or so I believed. But that morning, instead of my usual peace, I was standing in disbelief in front of an unauthorized fence that carved through my slice of paradise. I scanned the fence line. It stretched in both directions like a prison perimeter, slicing through my access to the lake and continuing up to the neighbor's yard before curling back toward the private subdivision road. Who installs a fence across someone else's lakefront without a single knock on the door? By afternoon, the answer strutted up my gravel path. Karen Roush, HOA president, clipboard in hand, like a badge of divine authority. She wore a lavender blouse stiff enough to chafe granite wedge sandals entirely unsuited for gravel, and an expression that suggested she ate conflict for breakfast. Before I could ask anything, she beamed a thin plastic smile and gestured at the gate like Vanna White revealing a brand new car. Hello there, we've installed a protective barrier around the lake. Access, she said, like she was announcing a neighborhood potluck. Strictly for HOA residents, you understand liability issues. Of course, I stared at her. I live right there. This is my lake access. Karen tilted her head and chuckled, like I just recited a knock-knock joke. Well, technically, that access strip sits on a parcel now, maintained by the Hemlock Shores Homeowners Association. You must have missed the notices we sent several. She tapped her clipboard as if it were a holy text. Safety first, right? I could feel my blood pressure ticking up like a pressure gauge. Karen, I didn't receive a single notice. And how did you even get the authority to build this? That land isn't part of your HOA. Oh, but it is now, she replied with a syrupy tone. The HOA acquired the lease last fall. It was managed by the old bait shop owner. Rest his soul, since his passing it reverted to open bid. We secured it and reclassified it as common HOA property. My dock. My piece had been paper trailed away while I was drinking coffee and catching fish. I stared at her, trying to process the twisted logic. The bait shop, of course, it all clicked. That narrow strip of land between my yard and the lake, where a shaky old shack once sold minnows and cans of warm cola. I'd always assumed it was mine by default, some county easement or long-forgotten formality folded into my deed. But no, turns out it wasn't. And this woman, this clipboard-wielding tyrant, had swooped in and leased it like a vulture claiming a carcass. Let me guess, I said, trying to keep my voice level. You didn't notify anyone actually living here? It was discussed in our October meeting fully above board, she chirped. You're welcome to file a formal appeal, though. As a non-member, I'm afraid you won't have any voting rights. I blinked. I wasn't even part of the HOA. I'd bought my land before Hemlock Shores ever existed, before anyone even dreamed of forming a homeowner dictatorship on the lakefront. Yet somehow this bureaucratic warlord had cordoned off my lake access and declared it her domain, without so much as a knock. The next morning, I brought bolt cutters down to the dock. Call it a symbolic gesture. Call it defiance, but I wasn't going to be fenced off from the place I'd fished every morning for years. I barely snipped a single link before Karen showed up in full regalia, security guy in tow, and immediately called the sheriff. To his credit, the deputy seemed just as baffled as I was. But after checking the county map, he confirmed it while I owned my house and everything around it. The little sliver with the dock leased by the HOA wasn't technically mine. Karen stood off to the side, smug as a cat in a canary cage. That same day, a new sign appeared. Do not trespass. Violators will be fined $10,000, and the blinking camera kept watch, recording every frustrated glance I gave it. I tried to be civil. I showed up to the next HOA board meeting, hoping reason might prevail. It felt like a low-budget reality show full of people who either feared Karen or worshipped her. HOA badge like it was the crown jewels. One man leaned over and whispered, "You're not on the lake list anymore." I nearly laughed. What the hell was a lake list? And then came the kicker. Karen had the only key to the gate's lock. For days I sulked. What could I do? Spend a fortune hiring a lawyer to win back 10 feet of shoreline? Dig a tunnel under the gate like a cartoon escapee? I even considered building a floating dock on my side and staging a kayak protest just to make a point. Then I saw it like a beacon. A for sale sign staked quietly on the other half of the same parcel Karen had leased. Turns out the land was technically split into two narrow lots. I pulled out my phone and called the number on the sign. The real estate agent nearly tripped over herself, thrilled someone was interested, the seller. An elderly woman in Alaska who inherited the plot decades ago and hadn't thought about it since. That night I sat on my porch with a fresh cup of coffee, watching the ridiculous gate glint beneath the moonlight, like some petty monument to overreach. And I smiled. If Karen wanted power that badly, she was about to get it, just not the way she expected, because I was going to buy the land with the only other gate key. 2 weeks later, bam, the paperwork was finalized. The deed was in my name, and I officially became the owner of the narrow, overlooked, and now hilariously valuable strip of land, the very strip that held the gate Karen had installed with so much pride. The irony, when she leased the adjacent parcel, she'd assumed the other half was part of the same plot, just like I once did. But the sliver with the actual gate post buried deep in the ground, that wasn't under lease. It was listed for sale, and I bought it for less than the cost of a new fishing boat. It was almost poetic. She locked me out, and now I own the very lock I gave it a week. I waited long enough for the gate to embed itself into the HOA's sense of control, for Karen to feel comfortable with her little metal monument to micromanagement. The lake's annual HOA summer brunch was fast approaching, and sure enough, the event was set to take place right at the far end of what used to be my dock, now transformed into Karen's prized community lakefront. From my deck, I watched as the preparations began. Folding chairs lined up in perfect HOA-approved symmetry. A white canopy tent rose like some suburban wedding arch. Someone even wheeled out a chocolate fountain. I couldn't believe how much artificial elegance was being projected into what used to be my peaceful backyard. And that's when I made my move. The morning of the event, I walked down to the gate, calm and quiet, a lockpick kit in my pocket. I wasn't breaking in, I was changing the lock. I replaced the old one with a brand new heavy-duty industrial padlock, the kind that would look right at home on a military bunker. Then I posted a fresh laminated sign, simple and clean, private property accessed by owner permission. Only that afternoon they came. A parade of pastel polos, floral dresses, and sun hats descended upon the neighborhood shoreline. Karen strutted toward the gate, first clipboard in hand, sunglasses perched like a crown. She reached for her key. It didn't fit. She tried again. Still nothing. She wiggled, jiggled, twisted, and banged the key like it owed her money. Her face turned crimson. Murmurs rose behind her as HOA members began to shuffle in confusion. Finally, with a forced smile that could have cracked granite, Karen announced, "Oh, small technical difficulty with the gate, folks." Nothing to worry about. That was my cue. From my deck, I raised my lemonade in salute. She looked up. I smiled and tossed her a manila envelope. Inside a copy of the deed. She caught it and opened it with trembling hands, reading through the pages like they were written in a lost language. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. You can't just buy community property," she stammered. I walked up to the gate, leaned casually on the fence, and said, "You're right, that's why I didn't. I bought my property, the one your gate is currently standing on. It runs all the way to that big rock there." Her expression contorted like she just chewed a lemon wedge. She flipped to the plot map helpfully highlighted in neon yellow, and her eyes widened as the realization hit. She wasn't on HOA land. She wasn't on community space. She was standing on my property and had been for weeks. "But we installed this gate," she said, voice cracking. "And I own the dirt underneath it," I said with a smile. "In fact, I'm thinking about replacing it with a hammock." That got a laugh from someone in the crowd. Karen turned eyes wide, but the tide was already turning. Several board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A few even cracked smiles. Stephanie, the sharp-eyed board secretary, known for her no-nonsense attitude, raised an eyebrow and crossed her arms like she just witnessed a season finale twist. She didn't see coming, but thoroughly enjoyed. Karen stormed off, phone plastered to her ear. demanding an emergency board meeting. I let her go. There was no emergency session that could undo what had just happened. The HOA had leased half the land and constructed improvements onto a piece of property they didn't legally control. I had bought the other half the portion with the gate and with it full control of the structure, the easement and any access rights. Legally, the HOA couldn't touch that gate without my explicit permission. The very next day, I filed an official notice with the county clerk. The fence and gate were now officially noted as partially installed on private property, and any attempt to modify or access them without authorization would be considered trespassing. I sent certified copies to the HOA, the sheriff's department, and just to be thorough, Karen's lawyer, whose contact information I'd found in a public HOA records archive. Then I installed a motion-activated floodlight and a visible camera facing the gate. It didn't record anything. I wasn't looking to catch them in the act. I just wanted them to know I was watching. Karen's retaliation attempts arrived quickly and predictably. The first was a formal letter accusing me of undermining community morale. A second letter followed from the HOA's legal counsel, citing an obscure clause in their charter about cooperative land stewardship. I mailed back a copy of my deed with a bright yellow post-it stuck on the front. It read, "Cooperate this." Stephanie stopped by a few days later. She wasn't confrontational, just curious. She asked if I'd mind walking the property line with her. I agreed. We strolled the length of the fence and she shook her head repeatedly, her annoyance barely contained. Karen told the board this was uncontested HOA property. She said she never mentioned any boundary issue. She never got legal clearance, and she definitely didn't say she was fencing off land we didn't own. She'll need more than duct tape to patch that mess, I replied. Stephanie smirked. She's going to blow a gasket when the board realizes she spent over $3,000 in HOA funds, fencing land we legally have no claim to. Then she better upgrade that gasket, I said. Over the next few days, the HOA's tone changed, subtly but noticeably. Stephanie began showing up to board meetings with a furrowed brow. Rumors swirled about internal disagreements and misappropriation of funds. One board member abruptly resigned. Another submitted a motion for a full independent financial audit. And Karen, well, she tried filing a zoning complaint against me with the county. It backfired beautifully. The zoning inspector came out, reviewed the property lines, and told Karen flatly that she had no jurisdiction over my parcel. In fact, she would now need to request formal permission if she wanted to host any HOA-related events on it. In the future, Karen tried to argue, waving her clipboard like a sword. The zoning officer shrugged, pointed at the parcel coordinates on the GIS map, and said, "He owns it. It's not under HOA domain." End of story. By the end of the week, Karen made one last desperate play. She hired a locksmith to replace the gate lock again. The poor guy showed up, looked at the gate, checked the nearby survey markers, then called me directly. I walked down with a smile, a bag of chocolate chip cookies in hand, and a laminated copy of the deed showing I was the legal property owner. The locksmith laughed, accepted a cookie, and drove away without touching a thing. That night, I set up a folding chair just behind the gate. I brought a cooler, a paperback novel, and soaked in the breeze rolling off the lake. Occasionally, HOA residents walked by. Some looked away awkwardly. A few offered shy waves. One even dropped off a six-pack of craft beer with a quiet thank you for standing up to the madness. By that point, it wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about principle. Karen had tried to turn my land into a pawn in her neighborhood chess match and lost. If she wanted control, she'd need to find it somewhere else. On this side of the gate, I had the key and the final say. As July arrived, the battlefield lines weren't drawn with caution tape or signs anymore. They existed in a kind of shared understanding, quiet, invisible, and undeniable. The gate was no longer just metal and hinges. It was symbolic. To me, it meant boundary ownership and sweet poetic justice. To Karen, it was a daily reminder of the one fight she couldn't spin, twist, or win. But Karen wasn't done. Just because she'd been outmaneuvered on land didn't mean she was out of moves. Her next phase, water. It started innocently enough, boats. Not mine, of course. I still couldn't easily launch mine without hoisting it over the fence like I was training for a triathlon. These were HOA boats. Paddle boats and aluminum skiffs that began appearing on the far side of the lake. At first, I thought it was just summer fun, until I noticed a pattern, the same boats, the same people. And then those people started docking behind my property on my shoreline, like they'd stumbled onto a public park. I approached one couple who were unloading a picnic basket onto my grass. They seemed puzzled when I asked what they were doing. Oh, the man said, we were told this part of the lakefront is open to the community. Karen sent out a newsletter. She marked it as one of the new HOA boat landing zones. I nodded slowly, trying not to laugh. Did that newsletter mention who owns the land you're currently standing on? The woman blinked. Wait, this is yours? I pointed to the sign I'd bolted to the gate. It had a new addition. Private property parcel, number 2483. No trespassing. I'd added it after the third uninvited boat party. Then came the buoys. Bright orange and strung together like a floating fence, they showed up one morning without warning. They stretched in a rough curve from the far bank all the way to within 20 feet of my dock. Attached to the middle buoy was a sign that read, Community Swim Area. HOA members only. That's when I knew Karen had moved to phase 2 of her campaign. If she couldn't claim victory on land, she'd try to reclaim the lake, one plastic buoy at a time. I called the county again. This time a water rights official came out, clipboard in hand, and assessed everything. His verdict was swift and final. The HOA had no jurisdiction over navigable water. The buoys were unauthorized and had to be removed. Within a week they were gone, fished out and carted off by a work crew in a battered pontoon boat. I didn't even have to lift a finger, but that only seemed to push Karen deeper into her spiral. The next week, a teenage neighbor slipped me a folder like he was passing classified intel. He said his mom had printed it out and left it on the kitchen table. Inside were scans of the most recent HOA meeting minutes goldmine. Stephanie had objected repeatedly to Karen's decisions only to be steamrolled over, but the real treasure. Language peppered throughout the notes, phrases like potential legal avenues against the gate obstruction, a reclamation strategy, and a proposed motion to reclassify my strip of land as community greenway space via a contested board vote. That's right, she was trying to vote her way back into ownership of land I had legally purchased. She thought if she couldn't beat me legally, she could outmaneuver me bureaucratically. It was time to stop reacting and start pressing buttons of my own. I called up Brian, an old college buddy engineer like me, but with a more interesting day job at the Municipal Zoning and Planning Office. Over coffee, we pulled up some dusty property records and found something fascinating. The strip I owned was narrow, less than 6 feet wide in spots, and completely unused for infrastructure. That made it eligible for reclassification under the state's non-commercial preservation clause. In plain English, I could apply to designate the entire stretch as an ecological rest corridor. Brian helped me file the paperwork. 2 weeks later, the land wasn't just mine, it was legally protected. No events, no gatherings, no installations, not even a garden hose without a permit. The gate, the dock, the path, now part of a restricted access ecological zone complete with a shiny new sign from the county. Karen's reaction was swift and theatrical. She called an emergency HOA meeting and tried to rally the neighborhood, but this time, the crowd wasn't with her. Residents were tired. The board was splintered. And Stephanie? God bless her, showed up on my porch the next morning with news that made me laugh so hard I spilled my coffee. She tried to vote to override the designation, Stephanie said, grinning. Called it a betrayal of community trust. I pulled out the county ordinance mid-meeting, told everyone you followed at every rule to the letter. Even paid the filing fee yourself. The motion didn't even get a second. She handed me a cookie from the meeting. It was oatmeal raisin. I forgave her. For the next week, tension simmered like a kettle on high. Karen refused to let it go. Every day she paced the property line, muttering into her phone, snapping photos like a neighborhood version of CSI. Then one afternoon it happened. I was out back watering my garden when I spotted her by the gate, crouched down, screwdriver in hand, trying to loosen the hinges. I walked over quietly, didn't say a word, just stood behind her until the sunlight shifted and cast a long shadow across her back. She froze. Looking for something, I asked casually. She turned slowly, still crouched, caught mid-wrench. Oh, I was just inspecting the damage, one of the residents said. The gate looked unsafe. Interesting, I said, considering no one's touched it. But you? She blinked. You installed a camera. Yep, legal on my property. And it has a microphone, too. Picks up everything, especially rogue hardware. Tampering. Karen straightened up, wiped her hands, and walked away without another word. But I knew she wasn't finished. Not yet. She wasn't wired to surrender. She was going to escalate. I could feel it, and this time I'd be ready. Karen stood brushing off her knees like she could shake off the humiliation. You're being extremely uncooperative, you know. And you're lucky. I don't charge admission, I replied, gesturing toward the posted sign. You're welcome to leave before the county adds trespassing to your list. She turned without another word, cheeks blazing, her stiff strides clicking down the path. I watched her disappear around the bend, muttering to myself. She was unraveling, and it was only a matter of time. The final blow didn't come from me. It came the next week, courtesy of Stephanie. She gathered enough board votes to initiate a full audit of HOA finances. The results were glorious. Karen had funneled over $88,000 to fencing and safety enhancements, most of it undocumented and unauthorized. Tucked into that expense line, a weekend stress relief, spa retreat, allegedly for board morale, conveniently booked under her niece's name. Karen was suspended pending investigation. She resigned 2 days later, citing a toxic environment in a group email that no one responded to. Word spread faster than wildfire. Neighbors I hadn't spoken to in months started stopping by. Some brought pies. One woman dropped off a six-pack. A retired teacher hand-painted a wooden sign that read, "Local Legend, Gatekeeper of Hemlock." I proudly planted it beside my fishing chair. Peace didn't return all at once, but it came, like the lake after a storm, calm, slow, and steady. The buoys never reappeared. The gate remained locked but never closed to good people. Kids came by to fish. The elderly couple 2 houses down liked to sit on the dock with their thermos of tea. I laminated permission slips and kept them in a folder. If someone asked nicely, they got one. Simple as that. The HOA began rewriting its charter. Fewer rules, more common sense, less. Karen and I finally got back to fishing. I stopped checking over my shoulder. I read books on the dock again. Things were good. Until she came back, not in person, but through the internet like a rebooted villain. No one wanted Karen reemerged online with the tenacity of a conspiracy theorist and the editing flair of a bored teenager. She launched a campaign called Save Our Shoreline, complete with a Facebook group, a YouTube channel, and a slew of progressively unhinged TikToks filmed in what appeared to be her Florida backyard. Apparently, she'd moved states, but proximity had nothing on obsession. If anything, it made her more dramatic. The videos were a surreal experience. In one, she stood in front of a poorly keyed green screen showing Hemlock Lake, proclaiming that an entitled non-member me had stolen sacred community land and erected a fence like a medieval tyrant. She flashed blurry screenshots of my gate with labels like greedy anti-neighbor and my personal favorite gate goblin. Another video featured swelling orchestral music, a slideshow of Hemlock Lake through the years, and actual ducks overlaid with sad violin. It cut to stock footage of crying children, drones soaring over gated properties, and finally a stormy sky, while she monologued about how bureaucracy had been weaponized to oppress good people. At first I laughed, then I ignored it, but the internet didn't. One of the videos caught the attention of a mid-tier outrage blogger. Within days, my little gate was trending. Hashtags like #LakeLockdown and #FreeTheDock started popping up. Strangers found my public property records. One left a voicemail asking how much I charged to rent the land back to the community. Another man from Oregon said he wanted to make a documentary. "Have you ever been to Hemlock Lake?" I asked. "No," he replied, "but injustice is universal." At first I was furious. I hadn't asked for fame, infamy, or any kind of spotlight. I just wanted to fish, sit by the water, and not have to argue with power-hungry people wielding clipboards. But then something unexpected happened. The internet, that great swirling tide of chaos and memes, turned on Karen Reddit. Threads popped up, dissecting her videos, pointing out inconsistencies in her long history of HOA complaints from previous residences. Someone found a Yelp review she'd left for a nail salon that read like a manifesto. Another thread titled "Karen Tried to Fence a Lake and Got Wrecked by a Fishing Grandpa" made it to the front page. They turned me into a meme. A photo of me in my fishing chair holding a lemonade became captioned with things like, "You shall not bass in gatekeeping done right." A local news station even reached out. They wanted to do a feel-good segment. I politely declined, not wanting more attention. Still, they aired a story based on public records and included a zoomed-in image of the property deed with dramatic narration. Stephanie called me afterward, laughing so hard she could barely speak. "It's official," she said between gasps. "You're Hemlock's first viral legend." The attention died down after a while, as all internet things do, but the consequences for Karen didn't. The renewed interest triggered a closer look at her time in the HOA. A few residents she'd previously alienated stepped forward with complaints that had been dismissed or ignored. Misuse of funds, false citations, and manipulation of board votes. It wasn't enough for criminal charges, but it was enough to blacklist her from ever holding an HOA leadership role again, not just in Hemlock Shores, but across several statewide community networks. And then in a move that nearly made me spit out my coffee, the county sent her a fine. Turns out, some of her unauthorized installations and her forged permit application for the original gate qualified as zoning violations. She'd signed a document claiming the land was HOA controlled when it wasn't. That fine close to $10,000 plus legal fees. Karen's online presence went quiet. Not long after that, no more rants, no more green screen lakes. She posted one last cryptic message. Moving on to better waters. I assumed that meant some gated condo complex in Boca Raton. Back in Hemlock, things were finally starting to breathe again. Stephanie and the new board were hard at work rewriting HOA policies with a focus on transparency and neighborhood inclusion. She even invited me to one of their sessions, not as a member, but as a consultant. I declined the official invitation, but agreed to swing by with donuts and sarcasm, which seemed like a fair trade. One morning, I walked down to the gate and decided to make one final change. I removed the heavy-duty padlock and left the gate wide open. In its place, I installed a small post with a laminated sign that read, "Access granted by courtesy, respect earns welcome. Entitlement earns nothing." It wasn't a legal restriction anymore. It was a test of character. And you'd be surprised how many people actually asked before stepping through. That week, I got a knock on the door from a teenage boy I hadn't seen before. He introduced himself as Mason said his family had just moved in, and he'd heard, "I own the best fishing spot on the lake. I'm not going to lie," he said nervously. "My friends dared me to sneak in, but my grandpa always said the right way is slower but doesn't burn bridges." I looked at him for a moment, then reached into the folder I kept under my porch swing and pulled out one of the laminated permission slips. "Welcome to the lake, Mason," I said. "Just clean up your bait wrappers and don't scare the fish." His grin could have lit up the whole shoreline. The next few weeks were peaceful in a way I hadn't felt since I first moved here. Kids fished, retirees strolled along the shore. Even the raccoons seemed less hostile. The gate remained open, but its story lingered like the ripples that spread out from a cast line. And in a strange twist, people started treating the area with more respect than ever before. Maybe it was the story. Maybe it was the quiet symbolism, or maybe nobody wanted to be the next character in one of my local legends. Not long after, I got a letter in the mail from Karen. It wasn't a threat, nor was it an apology. It was something in between, oddly formal, like a resignation letter written in lowercase humility. She said she'd taken some time to reevaluate her relationship with leadership roles and was now working with advocacy groups to prevent HOA abuse in her new state. Enclosed was a pamphlet from one of those groups and a short handwritten note. "We might have started as enemies, but maybe we both taught each other something." I didn't respond. Not out of bitterness, just a quiet sense that letting it end there held more power than any reply I could draft. Besides, I had fish to catch, and so the gate remained weathered, sturdy, slightly off-kilter from years of drama, but open. Not because I had to keep it that way, but because I could. The irony was never lost on me. A fence meant to keep me out had become a symbol of who could come in, and the key was no longer made of metal. It was made of manners. 1 year later, to the day, I stood on my dock with a thermos in one hand and a fishing pole in the other, staring out at the same patch of lake that had once been the stage for one of the most ridiculous property disputes in county history. The gate still stood, though the black paint had faded and the iron had taken on a rustic charm. Less monument, more memory. I'd left it there not to gloat and not even as a warning, but because it had become part of the story. And sometimes stories matter more than structures. What used to be a barrier was now a curious landmark, something people pointed to during cookouts and retold around community potlucks. The legend of the fence and the fishing chair lived on not in court filings or HOA minutes, but in laughter and shared glances, in the simple act of asking before stepping through. Because in the end, that's all I ever wanted, a little peace, a little lake, and just enough respect to keep the gate open. Stephanie had organized a Lake Appreciation Day, a laid-back community event meant to celebrate the efforts to clean up the shoreline, revamp the HOA bylaws, and highlight the neighbors who'd stepped up when things nearly went sideways. What I didn't expect, what no amount of planning could have prepared me for, was that Stephanie had slipped in a surprise segment labeled Hemlock Legends. I found out the hard way when my name blared from a megaphone and a group of kids came running up with handmade signs that read things like, "Thanks Gate Guy," and We loved the dock, one even had a cartoon of me in a fishing hat with a laser beam shooting out of the infamous gate. I still don't know why. The gate needed a laser, but I admired the creativity. I tried to wave them off, playing it cool, but Stephanie wasn't having it. She marched over, practically dragged me to the front lawn, and handed me a plaque. It was real wood, heavy, and hand-carved. The inscription read, "In recognition of community integrity and unmatched patience." I half expected something like, "Most likely to start a fence war," but it was actually classy. One of the kids tugged my sleeve and asked if I was going to write a book about it all. I told him if I did, it'd be called Karen and the Fence That Couldn't. Standing there in front of neighbors who were laughing and cheering and flipping burgers while kids played tag on the hill, I realized something quietly remarkable had happened. Somewhere between the lawsuits, the memes, the zoning paperwork, and the HOA chaos, we'd turned into a real community. People actually talk now. We lent each other power tools, shared cookie recipes, gossiped lightly. The board became transparent. The rules were clear. And for the first time in 6 months, no one had filed a complaint about lawn gnomes or unauthorized bird feeders. That was progress. Later that day, Mason reappeared taller now, with a little more confidence, and brought along his younger sister. She was shy, but curious, so I handed her an old but trusty mini rod and showed her how to bait a hook without flinching. 10 minutes later, she caught her first bluegill and screamed like she'd reeled in a marlin. Mason gave me a thumbs up across the dock. For that moment, everything felt exactly as it should be, simple, calm, and full of promise, but as life often reminds us, peace has a sense of humor. Right around sunset, a silver sedan rolled to a stop near the far end of the street. A woman stepped out slowly, sunglasses on, floral scarf catching the wind, flats cleaner than any shoe had the right to be, near dirt paths. Her posture was calm, but people noticed. The chatter faded. I heard the whisper pass down the dock, like a breeze, Karen. She didn't storm over, didn't yell or posture. She walked to the gate, my gate, and just stood there like she was facing the ghost of her past self. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small box, opened it, slowly peered inside, then closed it again. She didn't take anything out. I stayed where I was, didn't move a muscle. Part of me waited for her to do something dramatic, maybe deliver a speech or pull out her phone to record a new grievance. But she didn't. She looked at the water, then at me. Her voice wasn't loud. "Still got the key?" I raised my thermos slightly and gave a small nod. "Still don't need to use it." She gave the faintest nod, then turned and walked away. No flailing dramatics, no monologue about injustice, just a quiet exit stage left. The moment passed, the air returned to normal, and conversations resumed as if nothing had happened. Stephanie strolled over with a thoughtful expression and asked, "You okay?" I shrugged. Honestly, it didn't rattle me. People change or they don't. Either way, it's not my responsibility to decode their journey. My job's simple: watch the water, keep an eye on the kids so they don't hook each other, and make sure the folding chairs don't sink into the mud. That evening, as the sun tucked itself behind the treetops and the lake turned to a soft mirror of gold and orange, a few of us lingered behind. Someone lit a fire pit and we roasted marshmallows while Mason gave a dramatic retelling of the Great Gate War using fire pokers and stick figure impressions. The performance earned applause and laughter. A retired couple offered me a slice of homemade apple pie as a thank you for saving the neighborhood from tyranny. I didn't do all that much. I said between bites, I just stood my ground. They disagreed firmly. Eventually, as the fire burned low and chairs folded up one by one, I found myself alone again. Just me, the water, and the quiet hum of frogs starting their nightly chorus. I settled into my old weathered chair, eyes drifting across the calm ripples, and looked over at the gate. It still stood, slightly crooked now from age and drama, with the plaque still posted and the little trail beyond it worn smooth by careful, respectful footsteps. Funny how something meant to divide had become a passage. One walked not with entitlement, but with kindness. I thought about all that had happened. The threats, the rogue locksmith, the memes that somehow turned me into a minor folk hero, and the legal footwork that would make any first-year law student sweat. It started as a fight over access. It became a story about boundaries, about community, and about how the smallest places sometimes hold the biggest battles. Just before heading inside, I reached down and opened my tackle box. Tucked beside a spare bobber and an old fish hook was the original padlock Karen had installed on the gate. I'd kept it all this time, not as a grudge, but as a memento. Rusted jams shut, weather-worn beyond use. I stood, walked over, and placed it on the post beside the gate. No words, no ceremony, just a quiet reminder of what happens when control meets resilience. As I turned back toward the house, porch light glowing softly through the dusk, I heard footsteps behind me. It was Mason again, jogging up the path with that teenage energy that always seems to kick in just after dinner. "Hey," he said, catching his breath. "You coming to the late-night fish-off tomorrow?" I smiled and wouldn't miss it. "Cool," he said, grinning. "Also, someone stapled your fishing hat to the HOA bulletin board. Said it was modern art." I raised an eyebrow. "Was it you?" "Maybe," he replied with a shrug. "You said the gate was open, right? That includes artistic expression." I chuckled. "Next time I'm charging you gallery admission." And with that, I headed inside, Mason's laughter still echoing behind me, blending with the gentle lap of water and the soft hum of night. The lake stayed still. The gate stayed open. And the story that began with a lock now ended with something stronger. Trust, because sometimes the best key you can offer isn't the one you hold tightly. It's the one you leave hanging on the post, where anyone with respect in their heart can find it. This story reminds us that sometimes the most meaningful battles aren't fought with anger or lawsuits, but with patience, persistence, and quiet integrity. In a world where overreach and control can show up in even the smallest corners of our lives like a neighborhood gate, it's important to stand up for what's right without becoming consumed by the fight. Whether it's a workplace power play, an unfair rule at school, or a community issue that needs correcting, your calm conviction and clear boundaries can become more powerful than any clipboard or camera. And perhaps the greatest lesson is this: real leadership doesn't come from controlling others. It comes from creating space where trust can grow and respect is freely given, not demanded. So protect your peace, but keep your gate open for those who walk through it with honor.